I never thought the child I raised with trembling hands and sleepless nights would one day look me in the eye and call me dead weight. I stood there in his kitchen, holding back tears, remembering every meal I had skipped so he could eat, every blanket I had tucked around him when winters were cruel. But betrayal doesn't come like thunder, it seeps in slowly, until one day the storm finally breaks. That storm arrived the day my son threw me away. Before we continue, kindly hit the subscribe button, leave a comment below, and let me know where you're watching from. Have you ever been betrayed by those you loved most? Share your story below. I can still hear his voice, sharp, cold, and final. "You're just dead weight," he said. For a moment, the air left the room. The words floated above me like a heavy fog, pressing down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I stared at him, my own son, the boy I once carried in my arms, the child whose fevered forehead I cooled with trembling hands. His mouth was set in a hard line, his eyes avoiding mine as if I were a stranger trespassing in his home. I wanted to believe I had misheard him. My ears rang, my heart pounded so loudly that the silence that followed felt unbearable. The clock on the wall ticked in cruel rhythm, each second louder than the last. I searched his face, hoping for a flicker of regret, some sign that the words had slipped out in anger. But there was nothing, only the stiff shoulders of a man who had already decided I was a burden. I stood in his kitchen, the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence between us. My hands trembled as I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. In my mind, flashes of his childhood spilled forth, his tiny fingers clutching mine as he learned to walk, his laughter when I tickled his belly, the tears I wiped away after schoolyard fights. And now, here he was, grown and hardened, dismissing me with words that cut deeper than any blade. I felt heat rising behind my eyes, but I refused to let the tears fall. Not in front of him. Not when he already believed I was weak. My dignity was all I had left, and I clung to it like a lifeline. "Is that truly how you see me?" I whispered, though I knew the answer. He didn't respond. He only turned his back, busying himself with stacking dishes in the sink, as though my very presence was an inconvenience. The scrape of porcelain against porcelain felt louder than thunder. In that moment, I realized there was nothing more to say. The bridge between us had burned, and I had been left on the other side, surrounded by ashes. I straightened my shoulders, lifted my chin, and quietly picked up my coat from the chair. As I walked to the door, my footsteps seemed to echo in that hollow house. I wanted him to stop me, to call me back, to say he didn't mean it. But he didn't. He let me go without a word, and so I left quietly, swallowing the ache in my throat, the heaviness in my chest. What he didn't know was that his words had awakened something in me, something he would soon regret, because the story was only beginning. When I closed the door behind me that night, his words still echoing in my ears, my mind betrayed me with memories of a boy who once clung to me like I was his whole world. It's strange how a single cruel sentence can unravel years of love. Yet still, in the silence, all I could see was the child I used to know. I remember the mornings when he was little, running barefoot through the narrow hallway of our tiny apartment, his laughter bouncing off the walls. He'd come rushing into the kitchen, hair sticking up in every direction, demanding pancakes even when I had no flour to make them. I used to pretend the stale bread toasted in the pan was something grand, and he believed me because in his innocent eyes, anything I made was a feast. There were scraped knees too, so many of them. I carried a little tin of ointment in my handbag wherever we went. He would come crying, dirt smudged on his cheeks, holding out his leg as if I could kiss the pain away. And I always did. He believed my kiss held healing powers. And in those moments, so did I. At night, after long shifts cleaning houses, I would drag myself home, exhausted, my body aching from bending and scrubbing. But no matter how tired I was, I never let him fall asleep without a story. Sometimes it was the same book over and over. Sometimes it was a story I made up on the spot of brave knights, talking animals or mothers who always protected their children. He'd drift off with his small hand clutching my sleeve, and I would stay a little longer, watching his chest rise and fall, grateful he was safe, grateful I could give him even this. I sacrificed quietly. He never knew how many nights I went without dinner so he could eat. He never saw me hide behind closed doors, counting coins, wondering how to stretch them to cover rent and school supplies. I did it all willingly because that's what love is, giving without expecting anything in return. But love has a way of changing when only one heart is carrying it. And as I sat there that night, staring at the memory of his younger self, the contrast cut through me like glass. The boy who once ran into my arms now recoiled from me as though I were a burden. The same lips that once whispered, "I love you, Mama," had just called me dead weight. I should have seen it coming. The distance, the cold tone, the way his eyes hardened over the years. But part of me never stopped believing he was still that little boy with scraped knees and pancake dreams. When did that love turn into resentment? Raising a child alone is like walking a tightrope over an endless pit. You balance, you wobble, but you never let yourself fall because someone else's life depends on you. That was my life for years. From the moment my husband left, I became mother and father, breadwinner and caretaker, protector and provider. I took every job I could find, scrubbing floors, mending clothes, babysitting neighbors' children while mine slept soundly in the next room. My hands were always cracked from detergents, my back always sore from bending over. I told myself it didn't matter, because every ache in my bones was an investment in his tomorrow. There were nights when hunger gnawed at me like a relentless animal. I would set a plate of food in front of him, smiling as if I were full, while my own stomach remained empty. I remember one winter evening when the cupboards held nothing but half a loaf of bread and some tea leaves. I gave him the bread, tore it into little pieces so he wouldn't notice how small the portion was, and drank hot water myself, pretending it was tea. He never suspected. To him, life was steady. To me, life was survival. I pawned my wedding bangles once, the only gold I had left from a past life that felt like a dream. I can still see the shopkeeper weighing them, the clink of metal on the scale, the shame burning my cheeks as I handed them over. But I told myself it was worth it because the money bought him his school uniform, his textbooks, and shoes that actually fit. When he smiled in that crisp shirt, I felt richer than any queen. Through it all, I held on to one secret act of hope. Each month, no matter how little I earned, I tucked away a few bills into a savings account I had opened in his name as well as mine. It was meant to be untouchable, a seed planted quietly in the soil of his future. I never told him about it. Children shouldn't carry the weight of their parents' sacrifices. I wanted him to believe life simply unfolded for him, without seeing the cracks I papered over. I thought one day, when he was older, I would reveal it to him. I imagined his gratitude, his pride in knowing his mother had planned so carefully, had sacrificed so deeply, just for him. That account wasn't just money. It was every sleepless night, every empty plate, every silent tear transformed into security for him. But what he never knew, what he still doesn't know, is that the seed I planted years ago would grow into something far greater than I ever imagined. And soon he would find out. It didn't happen overnight. That's the cruelest part. If betrayal came like lightning, maybe I could have braced myself for the strike. But with him, it was a slow unraveling thread by thread, until one day, I realized the bond that had once held us together was worn so thin it could break with a whisper. It began when he got his first serious job. I remember the pride swelling in me when he came home with that offer letter in his hand. His smile lit up the small apartment like a lantern, and I clapped my hands together as though we had won the lottery. I cooked his favorite lentil stew that night, even though the beans were the last in the cupboard. I thought, finally, my sacrifices are paying off. But as his career grew, so did the space between us. The phone calls that once came every evening dwindled. His visits grew shorter, his tone sharper. Where once he asked, "How are you, Mama?" he now asked only, "Did you need something?" As though my voice had become an interruption in his busy schedule. When he married, the distance deepened. I don't blame his wife. She was polite enough, always offering tea when I visited. But I could see the flicker in his eyes when I lingered too long, the subtle sigh when I asked about his day. He no longer looked at me like a mother. He looked at me like a guest who had overstayed her welcome. I noticed the little things, though I never said them aloud. How he sat at the far end of the sofa, leaving space between us that used to be filled with warmth. How he scrolled through his phone while I spoke, nodding absent-mindedly, never really listening. How birthdays were marked with quick phone calls instead of surprise visits. How holidays passed with excuses about work, travel, obligations. I told myself it was natural. Children grow, lives change. I reminded myself that love doesn't always look like what it used to. But still, late at night, when the house was silent and my bed felt too big, I whispered his name into the darkness, hoping the boy I once knew was still somewhere inside the man he had become. I never complained. Not once. I carried my disappointment quietly, like a hidden bruise beneath my clothes. To burden him with guilt felt unfair, and besides, mothers are supposed to be patient, aren't they? Mothers are supposed to understand. At least, that's what I kept telling myself, but patience has limits. And though I stayed silent, my heart began to sense something deeper than neglect. Something colder, something deliberate. Love was fading, but betrayal was approaching. The night he called me dead weight, I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I didn't even defend myself. My tongue felt heavy, as though every word I wanted to say had been chained down by years of sacrifice. So I simply gathered my coat, slipped on my worn shoes, and walked out of his house. The door closed softly behind me, but inside my chest slammed with noise. My heartbeat, my shallow breaths, the echo of his voice, it all clattered inside me like broken glass. I stepped out into the evening air, crisp and damp, and for the first time in years I felt the chill of being utterly unwanted. The bus ride home was a blur. Faces came and went, strangers with tired eyes, but none of them saw the storm raging in me. I stared out the window, the city light smearing into long streaks of gold and red, as though the world itself was weeping alongside me. When I unlocked the door to my apartment, the silence greeted me like an old, merciless friend. No laughter, no voices, no warm "Mama, I'm home." Just silence. I slipped my shoes off and placed them neatly by the door, the way I always did. As though order could soften the ache of loneliness, I sank into the old armchair by the window, the fabric worn thin where my elbows had rested over the years. The ticking of the clock on the wall grew louder in that emptiness, each second reminding me of the years I had given away freely, joyfully to raise him. And now here I sat, with nothing but shadows and memories. My heart broke quietly. It wasn't a sudden shatter, but a slow, aching split that spread through me, like a crack in porcelain too deep to ever repair. I pressed a hand against my chest, whispering to no one, "How did we come to this?" Yet, beneath the grief, a strange strength stirred. I had left without lowering myself. I hadn't begged him to love me. I hadn't clung to him when he pushed me away. My dignity, fragile though it was, remained intact. And perhaps that was all I had left to cling to, that small, silent proof that I still had worth, even if he couldn't see it. The night stretched on, heavy and endless, but as I closed my eyes, I felt a faint whisper in my bones, like the shift of wind before a storm. Something was coming. Something I hadn't expected. I didn't know it then, but destiny was already turning in my favor. The morning after I left his house felt heavy, as if the shadows of the night before had followed me into the daylight. I moved slowly, making tea the way I always did, boiling water, dropping the leaves, waiting for that faint, earthy aroma to rise and steady me. But nothing could soothe the echo of his words. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint rattle of the kettle. I sat down at the small table, the chipped mug warming my hands. That's when the phone rang. The shrill sound pierced through the silence, startling me so much that I nearly spilled the tea. I glanced at the caller ID. The bank. My first thought was confusion. I had no debts, no loans. I hardly touched my account except to deposit the small pension and withdraw enough for groceries. Why would the bank be calling me first thing in the morning? My heart began to beat faster. That same anxious rhythm I felt when waiting for exam results as a schoolgirl. I hesitated, then answered. "Mrs. Rowe?" The voice was polite, professional. "This is the security department from your bank. We're calling to confirm some unusual account activity." Unusual activity. The word struck me like a slap. My grip on the phone tightened. "What activity?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, though my throat was dry. The man explained, carefully, as though choosing each word. There was an attempt to withdraw a substantial sum from your joint account yesterday evening. Before we authorize, we require your confirmation. My pulse quickened. Joint account. The one I had opened years ago, his name alongside mine. My little secret of sacrifice, my silent seed planted for his future. A deposit of decades' tiny amounts saved from cleaning jobs, sewing, and scrubbing until my hands bled. Money meant to give him a cushion when life grew heavy, but I hadn't touched it. Not for years. Who, my voice faltered, who tried to withdraw it? The line went quiet for a moment, the kind of silence that says everything without words. Finally, the officer spoke. The request was initiated by your son. He provided his identification, but the system flagged it because of the amount. The room spun slightly. My son. Not only had he called me dead weight, he had gone behind my back to take the very money I had starved and sacrificed to give him. I didn't respond right away. My hand trembled as I lowered the phone onto the table, the cord stretching taut. My tea sat untouched, growing cold, steam fading into nothing. He thought I was too broken to notice, too weak to resist, but he had no idea what he had just triggered. As I set the phone back into its cradle, my mind drifted back to the day I first opened that account. It was nearly 25 years ago, when my son was still a boy with holes in his shoes and a hunger in his belly that I could barely keep up with. The bank was small then, just a narrow room with a fan that squeaked overhead and an old clerk who wore glasses so thick his eyes looked twice their size. I remember clutching my passbook nervously, my palms damp as I signed the forms. His name went beside mine. I wanted him to feel it was ours, not mine. Not a mother's sacrifice, but a family's stepping stone. Every month after that, no matter how little I earned, I forced myself to set aside something for that account. Sometimes it was only a few coins, other times a few crumpled bills. I'd walk to the bank, hand over the money, and feel a strange sense of triumph, as though I had hidden away a treasure. That account was more than numbers on a page. It was my secret vow, carved silently into the ledger of life, for my son's future. When he was small, I dreamed of telling him about it when he grew older. I imagined the light in his eyes when I revealed the surprise. Perhaps on the day of his graduation, or when he married, I would hand him the passbook and say, "This is yours. Every coin in here carries a piece of me, a piece of your childhood." I thought he would understand then. Understand the missed meals, the pawned jewelry, the years of aching hands. Understand that a mother's love is not only measured in hugs and bedtime stories, but in the sacrifices she hides from her child so he may walk taller. But now, to hear that he had tried to take it without a word, without even asking, cut deeper than any hunger I had ever endured. He hadn't waited for me to gift it. He hadn't thought of the meaning behind it. To him, it was just money, ripe for the taking. I pressed the cool surface of the passbook against my lap that morning, staring at the inked numbers. Each deposit was a memory. The winter I patched other people's clothes. The summer I scrubbed tiled floors until my knees gave way. The Diwali when I sold my bangles just to keep the account alive. And all of it, every single sacrifice was for him. But now, his greed had cracked open the secret before its time. He didn't know it yet, but the very thing I had built for his future was about to expose who he had truly become. The banker's voice was calm, professional, but his words carried the weight of thunder. "Your son attempted to withdraw the full balance," he said. "Every last rupee." I sat frozen, the receiver pressed against my ear, my breath shallow. For a moment, I couldn't understand. My son, the boy I had raised with trembling hands, the man I had sacrificed my youth for, hadn't just dipped into the account. He had tried to drain it completely, to leave me with nothing. The room around me blurred. The curtains swayed gently with the morning breeze, but I felt no air. The clock ticked loudly on the wall, each second pounding into me, reminding me that this was real, that I wasn't dreaming. It was strange his cruel words from the night before had pierced me, yes, but this betrayal was different. Words can be spoken in anger, regrets that might later be swallowed. But this was deliberate, thought out, planned. I pictured him at the counter of the bank, handing over his ID, signing his name with that confident hand. I imagined his face impassive, perhaps even eager, believing that the years I had worked, starved, and pawned pieces of myself could be erased with one greedy signature. The officer on the line continued, explaining procedures, security checks, verification steps. His voice droned on like distant rain, but my mind was somewhere else, reeling through years of memories that now felt poisoned, the scraped knees I had kissed, the late nights I stayed awake stitching buttons on his school shirt so he would look presentable the next day, the countless meals I had skipped so his plate would be full. Had all of it been invisible to him? Had he grown blind to the love that had shaped his every breath? Tears blurred my vision, but they did not fall. I would not give them that satisfaction, not him, not the universe. Instead, I sat straighter, clutching the phone tighter, anchoring myself in the only thing I had left, my dignity. "Thank you," I told the banker quietly. "Please, do not release the funds without my confirmation." My voice surprised me, steady, firm, even though my heart was breaking. When the call ended, I placed the receiver gently back into its cradle. My fingers lingered there, pressing against the cool plastic, as though I needed its solidity to ground me. My son hadn't just wanted me out of his life. He hadn't just cast me aside with cruel words. He wanted everything I had ever saved. Every coin, every sacrifice, every drop of sweat turned into currency. He wanted to strip it all from me. And in that realization, I understood he hadn't merely betrayed my heart. He had betrayed my very survival. He didn't just want me gone. He wanted everything I had ever saved. The memory came to me unbidden, like a cruel trick of the mind. I was back in that little shop on the corner of our street, the one with dusty shelves and a tailor who smelled faintly of tobacco. My hands trembled as I handed over the borrowed money, my heart pounding with shame because I knew it wasn't mine. A neighbor had lent it to me, pity in her eyes as she pressed the bills into my palm. But when the shopkeeper slid the neatly folded school uniform across the counter, I felt something like victory. It wasn't just fabric, it was proof that my son would walk into his classroom looking like every other boy. Not the poor widow's child. Not the one who wore hand-me-downs 2 sizes too big. He would stand tall, equal to his peers. I remember bringing it home. The crisp white shirt, the navy shorts that smelled faintly of starch. He gasped when he saw it, his little fingers running over the buttons as though it were silk. "For me, Mama," he whispered, his eyes wide with disbelief. I smiled, though my throat ached. "For you, Beta. Always for you." That night I stayed awake, watching him sleep with the uniform folded neatly at the foot of his bed. I told myself every debt, every hunger pang, every humiliation was worth it. Because he was worth it, but now, decades later, that memory was pierced by another image so vivid it nearly stole my breath. My son, no longer a boy, no longer innocent, standing at a bank counter, not with wide-eyed wonder, but with cold calculation, signing papers, giving his ID, trying to strip away the last lifeline I had, the account that held not just money, but every sacrifice of my youth. The contrast made me dizzy. The boy who once hugged me tight, who beamed at a simple uniform, had become a man who could look at me and see only dead weight. My chest tightened, as if invisible hands were pressing down. I whispered into the empty room, "Where did I lose you? At what point did my love become invisible?" The silence answered back, cruel and heavy. I pressed the worn passbook against my chest, as though holding it could somehow hold on to the boy he used to be. But the truth was undeniable. He was gone. In his place stood someone I barely recognized. Someone willing to betray me, not just with words, but with theft. The illusion I had carried all these years that deep down, he was still my little boy shattered into jagged pieces. And the shards cut deep, leaving me bleeding inside where no one could see. What do you do when your own flesh becomes your enemy? I didn't call him. Not that day, not the next. My fingers hovered over the phone more than once, my lips forming his name in silence, but I stopped myself. I realized something. If I rushed into this with anger, he would win. He already thought me weak, frail, incapable. No, I would not give him the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I wrapped my shawl tighter around my shoulders and made my way to the bank. The city bustled around me, vendors shouting prices, buses honking, the smell of fried snacks drifting in the air. But I moved quietly, steadily, each step carrying me closer to reclaiming a piece of my strength. The bank's marble floor was cool beneath my feet, and the faint hum of ceiling fans reminded me of the day I had first opened that account so many years ago. Only this time I was not trembling. My voice did not shake when I approached the counter. "I need to update the security settings on my joint account," I told the officer, my tone firmer than I expected. He looked up, slightly surprised, perhaps expecting the timid old woman I must have seemed on paper. But I met his gaze directly. They took me into a small room. Papers slid across the desk. Signatures were required. Identification verified. With every stroke of the pen, I felt something shift inside me. It was as though I was rewriting not just the account details, but my own role in this story. I was no longer the silent giver, the woman who sacrificed and waited patiently for gratitude that never came. I was protecting what was rightfully mine. At the officer's suggestion, I withdrew a portion of the funds. Not all, just enough to remind myself that I was in control. The crisp bill slid into the envelope, warm against my palm. My throat tightened, remembering the years those bills represented. Each one was a fragment of my life, pressed into paper. As I walked out of the bank, the sun hit my face. It felt different, brighter somehow, though the air was the same. My steps were lighter. The envelope rustled inside my handbag, not as a weight, but as a promise. I returned to my apartment, set the money safely aside, and brewed myself a cup of tea. The bitterness of the leaves didn't sting as much this time. For the first time in days, I felt something close to peace. No, I hadn't confronted him yet. That time would come. But I was no longer a woman cowering beneath betrayal. I was preparing. Quietly, patiently. He thought he had taken everything from me. He had no idea I was gathering strength he had never seen before. I was preparing for a storm of my own. For days, I carried the secret like a stone in my chest. I told myself I needed time, that I had to prepare my words carefully, but the truth was simpler. I was afraid. Afraid of hearing his voice again, afraid of what it would confirm. Still, I knew I couldn't stay silent forever. Silence had already cost me too much. One evening, as the sun sank low and painted my small apartment in shades of orange and gold, I picked up the phone. My fingers trembled, but my spine stayed straight. I dialed his number, each ring echoing like a drumbeat in my ears. He answered on the third ring. "Hello?" His voice was impatient, clipped, the way a man answers when he doesn't expect or want to hear from his mother. "It's me," I said softly. My throat tightened, but I steadied myself. "I need to ask you something important." A pause. "What is it?" I gripped the phone tighter. "The bank called me. They said someone tried to withdraw all the money from our joint account." I inhaled sharply. "Was it you?" There was silence on the line, long enough for me to hear the faint hum of traffic behind him. Then came a quick, dismissive laugh. "That's ridiculous. Why would I do that?" His denial twisted inside me, but I pressed on. "They said it was you. They confirmed your ID, your signature. Don't lie to me." The warmth left his tone. His voice turned hard, brittle. "So, what if I did? That money is just sitting there. You don't even use it." I felt the blood drain from my face. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it through the receiver. "That money was for you. For your future. I saved it with my own hands, piece by piece, so that one day you'd have something to lean on. And you tried to steal it from me without even asking?" His breathing grew heavier, irritated. "You don't need it anymore, Ma. You live alone. You're old. What's the point of you holding on to it when I could put it to better use?" Those words spoken so casually, so coldly, burned deeper than fire. It wasn't just the betrayal. It wasn't even the greed. It was the way he erased me in that single sentence, as though I had already been buried, as though my life no longer mattered. I sat there in silence, the phone pressed to my ear, my lips trembling but my dignity holding firm. For the first time in my life, I realized my son no longer saw me as his mother. To him, I was nothing more than an obstacle standing in the way of what he believed was his dot, and that realization hurt more than hunger, more than loneliness, more than any wound I had ever carried. After I hung up the phone, the silence in my apartment felt heavier than ever before. His words, "You don't need it anymore," echoed inside me like a curse. I sat in my old armchair, staring at the walls that had watched me age, and memories began to seep in like shadows. I thought of my younger years, when betrayal was something I endured quietly. My husband, God rest his soul, was a man with many promises but little follow-through. I remember waiting for him at night, food growing cold, only to learn he had spent his wages elsewhere. I never argued. I swallowed my pain, told myself it was my duty as a wife to bear it. When he left this world too soon, I mourned not only the man, but the years I had wasted in silence. Back then, I told myself silence was strength. That enduring without complaint made me noble. But age teaches lessons youth refuses to hear. And as I sat there that evening, clutching my passbook to my chest, I realized silence had only cost me pieces of myself I would never get back. This time, it would be different. I wiped my eyes, though tears hadn't even fallen. My chest rose and fell with a steadiness I hadn't felt in years. I whispered into the emptiness, as if speaking to the ghosts of my past, I will not let him take the last piece of me. That account wasn't just money, it was my story. Every bill folded into it carried the weight of nights spent hungry, of bangles pawned, of hands raw from scrubbing floors. To let him steal it was to erase me entirely, to strip away the final proof that my sacrifices had meaning. No, I wouldn't allow it. For the first time since our confrontation, anger began to burn in me, not the wild, consuming kind, but a steady fire like a lantern held high in a storm. I wasn't powerless. I wasn't voiceless. And I wasn't ready to be discarded like an old coat forgotten in a cupboard. I thought of the boy he once was, the boy who clutched my hand when he was afraid of the dark. And then I thought of the man he had become, willing to throw me into the dark if it meant he could stand taller. That contrast carved something hard and unshakable inside me. I rose from my chair, feeling my knees creak, but also sensing a strange new strength. Age had weathered me, yes, but it had also made me resilient. He thought I was weak. He thought I would retreat into silence as I always had, but he was wrong. Was no longer the weak mother he thought he could crush. After that night, something inside me shifted. It wasn't just pain anymore, it was clarity. My son had shown me who he truly was, and I could no longer pretend otherwise. I had spent decades carrying him, shielding him, sacrificing for him, but I would not let him carry away the last fragments of my life. So I began to prepare. Not with noise, not with drama, but with the quiet precision of a woman who has nothing left to lose. I pulled out the old metal trunk from under my bed, the one that smelled faintly of mothballs and dust. Inside lay the documents of my life, birth certificates, property deeds, the passbook that held my sacrifices inked in numbers. I spread them out on the table, the papers whispering as they shifted under my trembling hands. I went to the bank again, this time with firmer steps. The officers looked at me with new respect when I requested changes, removing his name from the account, setting stricter controls, placing the funds in my sole authority. Their pens scratched against paper, their stamps thudded like small hammers of justice, and with each mark I felt lighter. I even sat with a lawyer one afternoon. The office smelled of leather and old files, dust hanging in the air like forgotten years. I spoke plainly. I need to draft a will. His eyebrows rose, perhaps surprised that an old woman carried such resolve, but he listened carefully. I outlined my wishes, not for him to inherit, not anymore. Instead, I thought of others who might truly value what I had built. Perhaps a grandchild, perhaps a cause close to my heart. My legacy would not be squandered by greed. At home, I began to sort through my belongings. Each object carried a memory. Each sari folded carefully had once touched a moment of joy or sorrow. I didn't weep. Not anymore. I simply organized, as if tidying up the last act of a play. In the stillness of those days, I realized something. I wasn't preparing for death. I was preparing for freedom. Freedom from the weight of hoping he might change. Freedom from the ache of waiting for affection that would never return. I wasn't running away from him. I was walking away, with my head held high, with dignity wrapped around me like armor. The storm wasn't loud, not yet. But I could feel it gathering inside me, around me. In every document I signed and every step I took, justice was coming, silently. But surely. I chose the place carefully, a quiet cafe near the bank, far from familiar faces, far from the walls of his home where I had once felt like an intruder. The smell of strong coffee lingered in the air, and the hum of voices blended into a steady background murmur. My hands trembled as I wrapped them around the warm cup in front of me. Waiting. When he walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. His suit was pressed, his shoes polished, his jaw set in that proud way he had adopted over the years. He spotted me, and for a fleeting second, something softer flickered across his face. But then it hardened, as though kindness was an indulgence he could no longer afford. "Why did you call me here?" he asked, sliding into the chair opposite mine. No greeting, no warmth, just business. I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment I saw both the boy he once was and the man he had become colliding in front of me. My voice shook, but I spoke anyway. "I know what you tried to do." His eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" "The bank called me," I said, forcing each word out steadily. "You tried to take it all. Every rupee. Without telling me. Without even asking." A flash of irritation crossed his face, then anger. He leaned forward, his voice sharp. "Why shouldn't I? That money was always meant for me. You saved it for my future, didn't you? You're just hoarding it now, letting it sit there while you rot alone. What use is it to you?" His words struck like stones, but I held my ground. The cafe seemed to fade, the noise dimming until it was just the two of us, mother and son, locked in a battle neither of us wanted, but both of us needed. "You call it hoarding," I whispered, my voice breaking. But every coin in that account was a piece of me. Nights I went hungry so you could eat. Bangles I sold so you could study. Years of aching hands and bent back, all folded into those bills. It wasn't just money. It was my love, my life, my sacrifice. He scoffed, bitterness curling his lips. "You're selfish. You're wasting what should be mine. My inheritance." I felt tears prick at my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. I straightened my shoulders and met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "I already gave you everything," I said softly, each word carrying the weight of decades. "But you threw me away." The silence that followed was heavier than thunder. He blinked, his jaw tightening, but no words came. For the first time, I saw a crack in his armor. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted. The day after our confrontation, I rose early. My body ached from another sleepless night, but my mind was clear. His face, his words, his cold laughter, they lingered, but they no longer bound me. Something inside me had snapped, and in its place grew a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. I dressed with care, wrapping myself in a simple sari the color of deep maroon. I pinned my hair neatly, looked at myself in the mirror, and whispered, "Enough." It wasn't just a word, it was a promised dot at the bank. The clerks greeted me with polite smiles, unaware of the storm in my heart. The air smelled faintly of ink and paper, the steady clicking of keyboards punctuating the stillness. I explained my request calmly, my voice steady, my words precise. I need to remove my son's name from the joint account. Effective immediately, the officer raised his brows but nodded. Forms slid across the desk. I signed each page carefully, the pen moving like a blade cutting through old chains. The sound of the rubber stamp sealing the changes echoed in my chest, thud, thud, like the beat of a new heart. Next, I requested a full transfer of the funds into a new account, solely under my name. As the numbers appeared on the screen, I felt both awe and sorrow. So many years, so much sacrifice reduced to a balance. Yet, for the first time, those numbers belonged entirely to me. Not a shared hope, not a hidden promise. Mine. When the teller handed me the new passbook, I held it with both hands, almost reverently. It was heavier than it should have been, as though it carried not just money, but decades of hunger, labor, and endurance. I walked out of the bank into the afternoon sun. The air was warm, a breeze tugging gently at my sari. People bustled around me, vendors calling out, children laughing, rickshaws rattling, but I felt oddly separate from it all, cocooned in a rare and quiet peace. I had done it. I had cut the final tie that bound me to his greed. The account was no longer a bridge between us, it was a wall that protected me, a wall he could no longer climb. When I returned home, I placed the new passbook in the same old trunk, but this time I did it without fear. The trunk no longer felt like a cage of secrets, it felt like a chest of freedom. For the first time in decades, I was free. News travels quickly when shame is involved. I didn't seek vengeance, I didn't whisper a word to anyone. But somehow the truth has a way of seeping into the cracks. Within weeks, his world began to shift slowly at first. Then, like an avalanche, the bank had flagged his attempted withdrawal as suspicious. Procedures had to be followed, explanations demanded. He was called in, questioned, his signature compared, his intentions scrutinized. I imagine the heat rising in his face as strangers in suits asked him to justify why he had tried to strip his own mother of her life savings. There is a humiliation that no amount of pride can mask. At home, things fared no better. His wife had always been polite with me, distant but courteous. Yet I heard whispers that she was furious when she discovered what he had done. Their marriage, already strained by his temper and long hours, began to crack under the weight of mistrust. Money troubles followed, arguments flared, and the walls of his perfect life began to tremble. Colleagues noticed too. A man's reputation is fragile, and once doubt seeps in, it spreads like fire. I was told he grew defensive at work, snapping at juniors, avoiding eye contact with seniors. He began to drink more, stay out later, return home to silence. I did not gloat. I did not rejoice in his downfall. I simply watched from a distance, my heart heavy but resolute. A mother does not stop loving easily, even when she has been broken. But love, when twisted too far, transforms into something else, something quieter, sadder. I pitied him, even as he reaped the harvest of his choices, and then came the moment he realized what he had truly lost. Not the money the bank would recover, reputations could be rebuilt, but me. He came to my apartment once, unannounced. I heard the knock, firm but hesitant. When I opened the door, his eyes searched mine, looking for the familiar warmth, the soft forgiveness that had always been there. But it wasn't. He tried to speak words about stress, about misunderstanding, about how he had acted in desperation. His lips moved, but my heart heard nothing. The bridge between us had collapsed, not in fire, but in silence. I listened politely, nodded once, and closed the door. That was when he understood. Money can be regained. Status can be restored. But a mother's love, once thrown away, does not return. Regret set into his face like stone, hard and immovable. And regret is a prison with no key. I sit by the window now, the evening sun spilling golden light across my small apartment. The world outside hums with life children playing in the street, a vendor calling out his last sales of the day, the faint aroma of spices drifting from a neighbor's kitchen. It all feels ordinary, yet inside me everything has changed. I am not broken. Not anymore. Yes, betrayal carved deep wounds into me, wounds only a child can leave upon a mother's heart. But I have learned that wounds do not define us. It is the healing that tells our story. And healing came not through anger or revenge, but through reclaiming my dignity, piece by piece. I think often of that account, of the sacrifices it represented. For years I saw it as a gift meant for him, the boy I once carried. Now I see it differently. That account was never just for his future. It was proof of my resilience, my ability to endure storms and still keep building. He tried to take it from me, but he could not erase the woman who created it. I've realized something important. Peace is not in holding on, but in letting go. I let go of the hope that he would change. I let go of the pain of his words. And in that release, I found myself again. Sometimes loneliness visits me in the quiet hours of night. I won't deny it, but it no longer feels like emptiness. It feels like space. Space for me to breathe, to remember who I am being a mother. For so long, my identity was tied to sacrifice. Now, it is tied to strength. To those listening, perhaps carrying wounds of your own, I want you to hear me. Betrayal may cut you deeply, but dignity heals deeper. You don't have to fight with fire to claim your worth. Sometimes walking away in silence is the loudest justice of all. I chose not to destroy him. I chose not to curse him. I chose peace, because peace, unlike revenge, cannot be taken away. I sip my tea as the light fades, the steam rising gently into the evening air. My heart is lighter now. The scars remain, yes, but they no longer sting. They are reminders, not of weakness, but of the strength I never knew I had. And so, I close my story here, not with bitterness, but with quiet pride. If my story touched you, please subscribe and leave your thoughts in the comments. You're not alone in this. We all carry scars of love and betrayal, but those scars can become our strength.